Hello and good day. Thank you for joining us for this session titled DAOs on the Rise. Are they the future of how online communities will operate? We'll be getting into it with three people from vastly different spaces within DAO. I'm your host, Ivan Sucharski, aka Ivan Thinking. Let's start off by having some introductions. Stephen, you want to start out?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Stephen Becker, Chief Operating Officer of the Maker Foundation. It is the entity that is helping to bootstrap MakerDAO. And as you know, MakerDAO is a DAO which facilitates the necessary tools to really build a DeFi economy on the blockchain, but also well known for its DAI stablecoin. So that's me. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. David, you want to go now?
Hi, I'm David Bleznak. I'm the founder and CEO of Total, also the chairman of the Prime Development Foundation, with the sole goal of furthering the PrimeDAO, which is meant to develop and offer services and products in a world where there are not custodians and clearinghouses.
Great. Jorge?
Hi, I'm Jorge, one of the co-founders of the Aragon project, which we started back in 2016, almost 4 years ago, which is crazy. And now I'm the CEO of Aragon One, which is one of the companies developing core Aragon infrastructure, and we're recently working on Optimistic Snapshot.
Great, thanks. My name is Ivan Sucharski, aka Ivan Thinking. I'm a social scientist, head of research for DeepDAO.io, which is a company that is trying to collect as much information about DAOs as possible and organize that data so that those who are interested in DAOs, whether it's investing or research or thinking about joining a DAO, can look into and understand a little bit more about what's going on in the DAO space. We have a dashboard right now. And to start off with, I was going to tell you a couple cool DAO facts about the growth of DAOs, because here this session is called DAOs on the Rise. So let's talk about some growth. So in 2018 and 2019, based on our research, we saw fewer than 250 active members in DAOs during that time period. And our most recent count has over 5,600 people. So quite a big jump since last year. We're tracking 79 DAOs, so we're not tracking every DAO, but we're adding more all the time. And the last one I'll give you is on the monetary side. In 2019, we saw assets under management of less than $5 million across all DAOs. And this month we just saw, after a small crash, we saw a recovery to over $350 million under management across the different DAOs. So as you can see, DAOs are real. They are growing quite quickly. There's a huge ecosystem, and without further ado, let's kind of jump into this. So we're trying to understand, based on the session titles, whether or not these DAOs have a space in facilitating online communities in the future. Are they the future of how online communities will operate? So what I'm curious about to start off with is, what do DAOs provide or allow that appeals particularly to online communities or facilitates online communities? Who's got something to say about that?
I can take this.
Sure.
So first of all, I love this that we're starting with online communities and we're not started with DeFi, which would be the obvious way to start. But I think DAOs have a unique appeal for online communities because online communities are insanely cool 21st century innovations. They're purely digital. As Kenny Rowe, also from Maker, said in our video that we released in 2018, you can have the same connection that you have with your neighbor, with someone in a chat room. And that's like purely digital, purely enabled by the internet. And DAOs are companies / organizations that are purely digital. They're purely on the internet. So we've been having companies for over 400 years, and they've, of course, haven't been able to evolve with the rate of growth that computers and the internet have evolved. And with DAOs, we have the opportunity to make this sort of organizations that are digital from day one, and we can experiment with them. We can operate them at the speed of software and not at the speed of lawyers.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. These natively digital organizations allow people to work together and accomplish goals together that there wouldn't otherwise be a framework for them to do. I think they also give people a sense of belonging and a connection to other people that is allows them to be tightly knit that they were missing maybe previous to the existence of DAOs. So I think that there's a practical part of the solution in terms of the the organization and the actual execution, and then there's also like the mimetic and sort of like community sense of belonging that it also provides for individuals. So I think it's doing more than one thing for groups of people.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to extend upon that. That's a really good point. If you just take a couple of steps back and think about it in terms of decentralization, there is firstly the level of transparency we've never had before that DAOs provide. And in the transparency and effectively immutability, you've intermediated where a single source of truth is manifested inside of a DAO in a way we've never seen before. So from my point of view, when I think of a DAO, it really is the manifestation of all things good that decentralization has to offer.
So kind of extending upon this, that it seems that DAOs do have something to offer online communities. What kinds of communities? I can't imagine that it's a one-size-fits-all. Are there specific types of online communities that would fit the DAO archetype better, or at least what we have for what DAOs can do today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen to date that, I mean, specifically the crypto organizations, companies or organizations of people that are built of crypto natives, I think are this fit for these types of organizations for several reasons. And then you have an array of different types of groups within that. I mean, just like you do in other types of organizations, whether it's nonprofit organizations or it's companies or it's political, you have a spectrum of ideologies, and DAOs are really, or in my opinion, DAOs are really just the formation of these different groups. It's not, there's no mandate simply by the definition of a DAO to be one direction or have one goal. It's really just the coordination of people. So I think it fits for people who wouldn't otherwise have coordination. So when you have people in Asia and people in Africa and people in the US and that are trying to coordinate, there's a natural, that didn't have another way to do that. There's a natural fit for those groups of people to utilize a DAO.
Actually, the one thing that David mentioned there was the inclusivity, is the accessibility that a DAO provides really actually expands the question to, not just what type of community, but what communities that could not, effectively connect with each other are allowed to connect now. So that it's expansiveness that really introduces this capability through this independent thing called the DAO. Because, I mean, to the first point, the focus was on, at least from my point of view, from decentralization. This is now focused on organization. So I think you can find that each DAO will have a bespoke objective that will cater for communities that in the traditional sort of world can translate nicely, but can now include communities that previously had no ability to organize, to actually organize.
Yeah, and I usually take that approach, but I'm gonna take the opposite one since we're talking about communities. I think that like you can make the case that people can coordinate and organize on the internet quite well. Like communities exist, like people organize on Reddit, they discuss on Discord, like there's a lot of things. So you cannot, I think it's a little bit unfair to say that DAOs will allow for communities to form in a way that they couldn't be formed because like communities exist. But I think that on the internet, we're seeing we saw the transition from Web 1 in which like people had their blogs, like people would go on the forum, like on the comment section and be terrible to each other. we saw the transition to Web 2, in which like people have like this richer interaction model, in which like algorithms decide what we see, what terrible ads we see, what political candidates are going to win the elections based on that. So we saw that, and like communities went from Web 1, from Web 2, and now the interesting thing about DAOs, and this is something that someone from my team says, is that DAOs are really Web 3 in the sense that communities have been evolving like all the way from Web 1 to Web 2, and like the real thing that DAOs do to communities is like it gives them the ability to natively hold money, because we finally have internet money. We have that with DAI, we have that with USDC, and we have other types of digital dollars, or like YUSD from Jern, which is this amazing dollar that earns amazing returns. So for me, that's the thing that DAOs do. And the way that I explain it to my friends and my family is like, yeah, you have like online communities with money. So like imagine that you can do a fundraising with your Discord or Reddit community. And that's like the basic idea if we're talking about communities.
Yeah.
And not necessarily about the coordination problems, like which we can get into it, and why DAOs are very great for DeFi, which I think it's also interesting. But like I'm way more interested in this, like how do we take these like magic internet companies and like make them available to the mainstream? And I personally think that gamer communities are probably the easiest, right? Because like they're used to like virtual things that everyone thinks, oh, that's a scam, that's not real. But like people have built their lives on like World of Warcraft and other games. So I think that we have an angle to get DAOs out of the DeFi world and like building for our friends and the problems that we have created for ourselves, and actually do something out there in the real world.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that, because I think you said one point that I'm also seeing when I'm explaining these things to people who are not crypto natives or not even on the internet all the time for that matter. You know, I'm explaining to them that there are problems that exist with Web 2, and those are really where I would say the application of a DAO, at least in the mainstream mind, sees the value right away, which is like, you know, you go on Facebook, and right now Facebook is having all these issues of, do we serve political ads? Do we do this? Do we do that? And who's making the decisions? You know, Mark Zuckerberg might be making a lot of these decisions, but if you could imagine if Facebook users were given 15 cents of Facebook shares every time they saw an ad, and then all of those people could then use those shares to vote on what is shown to Facebook users in the future, that really hits home for people. I think that they really understand, wait a minute, if I'm actually a stakeholder in this organization as a participant, as a user, I'm blurring the line between a shareholder, a user, a voter, a non-voting shareholder, blurring the lines between all of those participants in an organization. In my discussions with people who are not familiar with DAOs, that hits home for them. So I think you made a really good point in that transition.
Yeah, and just building a little bit on top of this. So I found myself making an argument to my girlfriend that I was like, did I turn into a communist? Like I having like this identity crisis, in which I was like, all right, so we've had our companies in the world, and like right now the top 5 companies in the world, I think, at least like publicly traded, they're tech companies, right? And like that's just a way to show that like tech scale like has surpassed everything else. Like we have like the top 5 companies, they were not alive like 30 years ago. I think like Apple must be the one that is or Microsoft, the one that is the oldest one. And that's just because the world is not prepared for exponential growth. And like these companies, like especially Facebook or Amazon, that for me are the worst examples. It was like you have these companies, these private companies that are owned by a handful. Like if you put $1 million on Amazon in like 1997, like the grandchildren of the grandchildren of their grandchildren are gonna be fucking billionaires, because that's how it works. But like the externalities of that, and I think it's even worse with Facebook, is that we're basically, these companies are creating like a public utility. Like they're destroying like massive amounts of jobs, and like you cannot compete with tech scale. It's not that people are lazy, it's that you cannot compete with fucking machines that get smarter the 2x every year. And the mere fact that these are private companies, because that is a system that we have and not DAOs, and like what you were saying, David, that like users and like suppliers, like they don't get an ownership stake on this. Ends up with a situation in which people are so confused that the only thing that they know how to do is like put a guillotine in front of Jeff Bezos's house, because they're so like, and this is only gonna get worse. So I think like the system is really fucked. And I don't know how we get it better, but like one can dream that if Facebook wasn't owned by Mark Zuckerberg and his buddies that were getting drunk in fucking Harvard like 15 years ago, but like the early users and like current users and the people that do the moderation and all the hard work, if they were owners and it was a public utility and like publicly owned as it should be, that we wouldn't be seeing like some of the problems that we're already seeing and some crazy shit that we'll start seeing soon. So yeah, long DAOs.
So what we're seeing, you know, so to kind of summarize broadly and with my own bent is that, you know, DAOs are really allowing for governance to be shared, for governance to be democratized. They're allowing for the governance of wallets, crypto wallets for the first time. And so communities can really take advantage of voice both, because money is voice as well. So voice in the ability to vote and voice in the ability to spend and to determine how to spend the treasure that the group has gathered. And so whereas in the past you had to kind of trust somebody to spend things in the way that you expected them to, and if they didn't, then hopefully you had some kind of recourse, but often you didn't, which makes DAOs pretty fun from that point of view, and opens up a lot of different possibilities. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the communities that fit DAOs and that DAOs kind of allow these cool things. But I'm curious about what are the biggest barriers that you guys see to people adopting DAOs, to DAOs usability, or to convincing people that they're worth using. It may be a software issue, it may be a community issue, maybe a social issue. So why aren't people adopting them today, and what's it going to take to get them to jump through that hoop?
Yeah, I think.
Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So if you don't mind, I'll kick off on that. I mean, as you mentioned, DAOs really are an expression of versatility and accessibility that we've never seen before. We're extending upon possibilities and manifesting them in ways that are absolutely incredible. One expression of that is really through autonomy. I mean, autonomy is an ideal characteristic that everyone strives for, but ultimately what comes with autonomy is the flip side of the coin, and that is risk. Being able to have the freedom and autonomy to do something also requires you to be able to assess and understand and control and react to a risk when it does happen. So some of the blockers to DAOs really come down to understanding that both sides of the coin are really what needs to be managed, not just the benefits and the good parts. It does come with the full scale of risk management that one needs to keep in the back of the mind. I mean, if you look at organizations and the specialization of labor and division of labor, it really showcases why autonomy was effectively concentrated. Now we've seen it as Jorge previously mentioned, being slightly abused to the point where people are saying, okay, well, we want that back, we want the autonomy back, we want the control back. But in doing so, you've got to move from that sort of central mind frame to a decentralized mind frame. And it seems theoretically easy to do, but when you actually do it, it becomes really difficult. Your expression in terms of your technology, your expression in terms of your governance may not always line up appropriately. You may have dissonance. And the dissonance basically comes about in terms of understanding ultimately what the objective of this independent, autonomous thing is trying to do in relation to the stakeholders contributing towards it.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, the biggest, just to go back specifically on the question there of what the hindrance to adoption is, I believe, is mostly regulation and then education or marketing. So like you have regulation at the core. I mean, and it's not the fault of, I'm not putting blame or fault on anyone here, but I just think that in the world we live in today, regulators have a duty to uphold the current laws and the current rules. And they can't just, shift and say, these new things that don't have guidance or don't have a rule book for can just do whatever they want. There are protections in a place for a reason. And so with the technology, as Jorge had mentioned, moving, twice, 3 times as fast as the, as humans are moving, it makes it very difficult for DAOs, which are this completely new radical concept, to just be accepted or allowed in terms of taking power from a centralized organization, which is the way all of companies work, right? In the US or even around the world. We're just going to change that completely and just everyone should be okay with it. I can understand there being a big struggle in that. So my opinion, it's going to be, can we have a set of rules that allow these things to flourish in one part of the world at least, so that it can exist natively on the internet and then globally. But then the second piece, I think, if you're just going to forget about regulation for a second, is really just messaging and education. You say the word DAO. I mean, you just say DAO to someone and what are you talking about? Are you talking about the chemical company here in Michigan? Are you talking about Dow Jones? And just like DAO doesn't really mean this in terms of mainstream acceptance. It doesn't resonate with people as this decentralized organization. It doesn't hit people. So if there's something more of a different message that people will latch onto, and maybe not something we can think of sitting here today, but I think that there will be a benefit to people, and that's what they'll latch on to, whether it's ownership, it's this governance, whatever it may be, and that's the message that will exist long term for people.
Certainly didn't help that the very first DAO was called the DAO and it got hacked. Sure. So if you Google DAO today, you may very well find a trail of tears. It's just not good. So, Jorge, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I very much agree with David. Legal uncertainty is the biggest risk for adoption. It's not a risk in this industry because no one gives a shit about the law and everyone just does illegal things. And it's been fine for most of us so far. Like for everyone, like whatever. But yeah, I very much agree. And I think the only thing that DAOs are being saved right now is because I don't think there's any DAO that needs the D. I don't think there's any DAO that you can make like a DAO, because like Bitcoin is a DAO, Ethereum is a DAO, but like the things that we're calling DAOs, I don't think there's any of this that are decentralized. And sorry if I throw some shade, Stephen, but I think a prime example is MakerDAO, right? We had the Black Thursday event in March, in which like Maker crashed. Like there were some weird liquidations in DAI, and like people got stolen. Like the protocol worked, but like some CDP holders or vault holders felt like they hadn't been informed about the risk. But then the people that lost money, they didn't go sue a DAO, because like a DAO does not have a legal personality as a company does. They went and sued the Maker Foundation because they assumed that the Maker Foundation was responsible for all of that, even though there was a DAO that set the parameters that made people lose money. So and this is actually a good thing. Like, of course we want to move into DAOs, but it's great that they sued the foundation and not the DAO, because if they had sued the DAO, a DAO is really kind of sort of a general partnership. Therefore, MKR holders would have been held liably together as for their actions, which means that if you're an MKR holder, that could have been pinpointed as like, okay, you made this decision that made people lose money, then you have a lawsuit to your name instead of like to the Maker Foundation. So I think legal uncertainty is like the biggest issue. I'm actually optimistic that the regulator, and like it seems like the SEC, particularly in the US, but this is way more than what the SEC can do. They're open to like understanding these things, and like some of their recent, their commissioners' recent speeches, like actually I think that they understand the space and most people that are investing in crypto. So I'm like sort of optimistic, but I think the biggest thing for adoption is actually legal uncertainty, that you participate into a DAO and like no one's aware of the risk that they might be taking on for themselves.
particularly if they start to manage quite a bit of money.
Yeah, or a lot of other people's money, which is when the issue comes.
Sure. Yeah. Stephen, did you have anything to add?
Well, the interesting part about this, and this comes back to autonomy and risk, is looking at the regulatory infrastructure and saying, well, what's the purpose of regulators to begin with, and understanding what the objective is. And when you do that, you realize that certain constructs and innovations require iteration in order for people to realize how to apply these constructs. I mean, to a certain extent, we need to live within a framework that we can all agree upon, and that's generally called law. And what you find is when you engage with something new and something comes of it, you need to take a particular position. And that's the nice thing about a DAO, is that you can take a position. You can take a position on the full scale. And that's what decentralization really offers, is that the broadening of the spectrum to say things like, I want to pursue this avenue of recourse versus this avenue of recourse. And that basically then applies the appropriate position against the framework of law, against the framework of a particular DAO, against the framework of the community, so that they can discover for themselves what this means. And ultimately, there is learnings and lessons that come from this that allow for the iteration to move forward and for progress to be made. So, consequently, sitting back and asking for legal certainty is of itself through an iteration. It's not going to come through some, clear declaration, because that assumes that the folks given this clear declaration are actually in this space and on the forefront. And that in of itself is a little bit of a contradiction.
But I mean, that's all great and beautiful, but like, I feel uncomfortable. I would, like, as an maker person, I would feel uncomfortable recommending people to vote, because like, if it wasn't the foundation that was sued, but it was a DAO, someone could have lost their house on that lawsuit, because they could have been held personally liable for the losses that the protocol had. So I think this is very risky. And like, we live in this utopia, oh, if there's a DAO, nothing happens, the law doesn't apply. Yeah. But I think that's very responsible, because someone could have been like the foundation's going to be okay. Like the Maker Foundation is going to be great. Like there will be arbitration and nothing will happen. There will be like, people will get paid out. But if like someone had gone to the DAO, like they had identified a few people, like they could have been like personally liable for the mistakes that the core developers or like the keepers or whatever made. So I think it's very risky to say, oh, just vote and like make like vote the change you want to see in the world, when like what you should be telling people is like, we don't know legally what you could be getting into. You could like, if you press vote here, you could lose your house. So I think we need to be really fucking careful with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously quite a bit of work to be done, both on the legal side, the regulatory side, how we respond to that, our openness to that, and so forth. Unfortunately, we are running a little low on time here, so I'd like to give each of you guys 15 seconds or less to chill your stuff, say goodbye, and all that. So go ahead, start, David. You're muted.
Sorry. I would check out PrimeDAO, as PrimeDAO is just starting its development. We're looking for other contributors and partners. You can check us out at primedao.io or primedao.eth.link.
All right, Stephen. Absolutely. Well, the one thing I can say is from the Make a DAO point of view is it is in fact a DAO, and it is something that needs to be considered appropriately from all points of view. And even if it makes you terribly excited, then I think it's all great. Thank you.
Jorge?
Yeah, I'm just gonna shill a standard that we're pushing. We're pushing this ERC 3000, ERC 3K. You can visit it at erc3k.org. Which we're trying to push as the standard for DAO governance and making DAOs infinitely scalable, so real human beings can also use it.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. And folks at home, if you want to check out deepdao.io for your DAO dashboard needs. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Ivan.